Your Imperial Majesty, it is a very great honor and a special honor for me to welcome you again to our nation's capital, and at the same time to welcome Her Imperial Majesty, the Empress, and all the members of your official party from Iran. I say a very special honor for several reasons. First, because our friendship goes back over a period of 20 years. When we first met in Tehran, when I was Vice President of the United States, and when you then were a very young emperor. Through those 20 years, both during the periods that I have served in office and during the periods that I have been a private citizen, I have been honored and I have been greatly assisted by receiving the benefit of your counsel on world matters. The second reason that it is a very special honor to have you here today is because of the unbelievably spectacular progress that your country has made under your leadership. I remember it 20 years ago. I saw it again when you received Mrs. Nixon and me so graciously just a year ago in Tehran. And there is no area in the world in which one can see more spectacular development in which the people of the country have benefited than in your country. And the whole world applauds you for the leadership you have provided to your people in bringing economic progress and justice to them. The third reason will, of course, be the major subject of our conversations today, and that is that we welcome you here as not only an old friend, as a progressive leader of your own people, but as a world statesman of the first rank. Our talks over the years have ranged over many, many subjects, and it is particularly important that we meet at this time. This is the first meeting that I will have had with a head of government or head of state since the meeting I had with Secretary General Brezhnev. And it is significant to note that of all of the areas in the world which pose a potential threat to peace in the world, that Iran is in a very key central area. I refer, of course, to the Mideast, to the Persian Gulf, and to all of that area that surrounds it. And what gives us a great deal of heart, those of us all over the world who are interested in peace, is that you have always stood for and stand for now a policy of contributing to the forces of peace and stability rather than to the forces of war and destruction. I know, therefore, that our talks will cover the whole range of world problems, but particularly that I will have the benefit of your advice on the problems in this critical area of the world, where with responsible leadership we can avoid war and build a new era of peace for the people of that area who deserve it. And certainly I've looked forward to these talks for a long time, and I know that I will not be disappointed, and I hope you will not be, by the progress that we will make in developing those policies which will contribute not only to peace, but to the progress and the prosperity which your country has enjoyed for all of that area of the world. And so again, we welcome you today officially, but more than that, we particularly welcome you and the Empress as good friends and old friends. We treasure that friendship, and from that friendship, we hope to work together toward a better world for both of our peoples.
I am deeply honored, Mr. President, to be once again your guest, this time alongside with the Empress, to pay our respects to the people of America and the friendship that they have shown towards us since the inception of official diplomatic relations between our two countries. But also to express to you personally my happiness to have the opportunity of talking to you and having the wise advices that you can always give, because in the world that we are living, especially in the days and years which lie ahead, we have got to be in constant contact in order to preserve what is really worth preserving, for which we are working, for which we are striving, and in our case, for which we are ready to die. You have mentioned graciously that our country is making progress. That is true, as the United States has made progress. What you have achieved since your independence is unbelievable. We have had the privilege of flying over your country since yesterday. What we see is something staggering, wonderful, and really something to be copied where it can be copied. You have been blessed with so many wonders of nature. The progress we are making is really to benefit the maximum majority of our people. We are following a policy of participation to the extreme limits. I could even say that, for instance, farmers would have an interest in seeing industries running well, and vice versa. Industries will be interested in the welfare of farmers because they will have a greater purchasing power. People from down the village to the big cities will have in various and different ways the means to express themselves freely. We are trying to develop our country with the maximum speed. We are giving our people the maximum possibilities of expression. But also, we want to make it very clear once more that we will keep not only our past glories and histories, but our future with vigilance. We are not one of those countries who will surrender, because what we will surrender is too much, is too great. All this, I hope, will create in the region some atmosphere of stability, of people, instead of quarreling, trying to understand each other, to cooperate, to fight against the still existing evils of maybe poverty, illiteracy, not enough medical care. But we shall do this all only if our honor is preserved, intact. Because life for us without independence, honor and dignity has no meaning. I know that you understand these words better than anyone else, Mr. President, because this is what you have shown all during your life. And the dramatic success you had in your foreign policies is a source of inspiration because, as you have said, the time of confrontation should be replaced by negotiation. Negotiation in good faith could have excellent results. And we hope you success in that field. And we shall do the same. But for ourselves, at least I add, we have got to be vigilant. We have got to be firm. We have got to be patient, but for all this, we have got to be strong, morally, in running our society, in our social justice, but also in our national strength to defend ourselves. Thank you again for your warm welcome, Mr. President. And I can only reiterate once more that I wish you and your government and your people and your country the best that you can wish for.
The Shah is generally accepted as having been a very repressive and oppressive ruler. His Savak tortured and killed. He lived in considerable splendor and opulence while there was terrible poverty in his country. In your book, Leaders, you write that he was not ruthless enough in quashing those who threatened his nation's stability. Do you think he should have been more ruthless?
Yes, I do, particularly in view of the fact that his opponents were not those who were basically more liberal, but because basically they were reactionary. They were the true reactionaries. Let's look at the Shah for just a moment and look at him very fairly. He actually was a progressive in a number of ways. He instituted a land reform program. He instituted a literacy program. He sent thousands of students from Iran to the United States, and particularly the United States, to study, and in other countries as well. he liberated women. The irony was that those he liberated, the women and the students he sent abroad, they came back and joined the revolutionary forces. And the irony was that the Shah, being progressive, was attacked as being reactionary and conservative on these particular issues, whereas his opponents were the reactionaries. Putting it very bluntly and very simply, the Shah was trying to move Iran into the 20th century. His opponents, Khomeini et al., wanted to move Iran back into the Dark Ages, and that's what they've done. Now, there was some repression, true. Now there is total repression. There may not have been enough land reform. Now there is none whatever. What I am simply suggesting is this, that when we look at the Shah, we have to look at him in terms of what he confronted. And he confronted revolutionary forces there that were not working, in my view, for what was best for Iran and certainly not best for ourselves. And most important from the United States standpoint, instead of having a friend in Iran, we now have one that is not only not a friend, but one that considers us to be the great Satan. I saw the Shah the last time in Mexico, at Cuernavaca, Mexico. He was then in the last phases of terminal cancer, although he would never admit it or talk about his own problems at all. But he was quite thin and quite pale. But his head still as active and sharp as it had always been. He's a very intelligent, introspective man. And he said that what concerned him about the way he was treated by the United States was not that the United States was for him or against him, but was the uncertainty of the policy. He says there's nothing worse when you are confronted with revolutionary and rebel forces and uncertainty insofar as support is concerned. One day, for example, he said statements would come in, public and private, from Washington indicating total support and urging him to stand firm. The next day, there would be some story leaked from a high-level aide, printed all over the world and given particular credence in Tehran, to the effect that lower-level or second-level people in the administration were meeting with Khomeini and others who were out to knock the Shah off, or out, as the case might be. And then the next day, there would be a story to the effect that in the event that the Shah left Iran or was overthrown, the United States would be prepared to accept any government that the people chose. Well, he said all of this had the effect of encouraging his enemies and, of course, discouraging his own supporters. He said that was a mistake. And I believe it was a mistake, too. As a matter of fact, what happened to the Shah, I think, could only be interpreted in that part of the world and other parts of the world as well, is that it is dangerous to be a friend of the United States, and it may pay to be an enemy. I think what we have to understand is that the Shah was the best friend of the United States in that area, in the whole Persian Gulf area, and it was Israel's only friend. The Shah, we must remember, in the 1973 war, furnished oil for our Mediterranean fleet when the other countries in the area had cut it off. And the Shah tied down the Iraqi forces by supporting the Kurds against the Iraqis so that they never got involved in the 73 war. And I know that the Shah, when he spoke in Mexico about what had happened, he could not understand why it was that among his critics in the American media, there were some of Jewish background, not all, but some who were among his most violent critics because they were liberals and they thought he was too reactionary and the rest. And he just couldn't understand that because he was the only friend that Israel had in that whole area of the world.
Did you say that if you had stayed in office that you would not have allowed the Shah to fall?
I would not have, no. I would have been steadfast throughout. I would have made it very clear down through the bureaucracy that there was to be absolutely no contact with those that were trying to overthrow him. I would have had a very good study made of Khomeini's background and would have found that exactly what kind of person he was, because by studying his background, they could have known that he was going to do exactly what he's going to do. The man is a radical reactionary. He's not a progressive in any sense of the word. See, the choice basically was not between the Shah and somebody better. The choice was between him and somebody worse. And it's very easy for me to make that choice.
If you had been confronted with the worst case from that point of view, and the Shah had been overthrown and hostages taken, and you were president, would you have taken him into the United States?
Absolutely. I would have taken him into the United States, and as far as the hostages was concerned, I would have handled that a little differently too. I don't say this in criticism of President Carter, because he certainly went through a lot on the hostage situation. He believes it may have cost him the election. I don't think it did. I think the economic issues were the major ones. But be that as it may, it didn't help him. But as far as the hostage situation was concerned, American foreign policy can never be made hostage to hostages. That's why hostages are taken, for purposes of blackmail. And we mustn't let that happen. And for example, when President Carter was asked about the hostage situation, he went overboard in saying that our first and then only concern was the safety of the hostages. Now, that is a concern, but our major concern is what happens to Iran, what happens to the relations between the United States and Iran. And in this respect, I would never have said, as President Carter did, that I rule out the use of force in order to get the hostages back. All that did was to encourage those that had captured them and were holding them in captivity, not to give them up. I remember President Eisenhower, during our administration and the vice presidential days, used to say on occasion that he had learned as a military commander that it's very important never to tell your enemy what you're going to do, because then he'll be ready for you. But he says it's just important never to tell him what you're not going to do, because then that will encourage him to do things he otherwise might not do. And in this case, that was a mistake, in my view, to do that. The other thing I would say is that with regard to the hostage rescue operation, that President Carter and the Pentagon, I assume they're the ones that joined in the decision, made a mistake and are not, again, following out an Eisenhower dictum. And that dictum is that when you make a play of that sort, you always assume the worst. And you cannot assume that your intelligence is going to be absolutely accurate. I have a very interesting reaction in that respect that Eisenhower had at the time of Lebanon in 1958. As everybody will recall, in 1958 in Lebanon, there was a crisis because the government there was under attack. There was a possibility that the Soviet Union might intervene, and Eisenhower had to make a decision as to whether or not to send Marines in order to establish peace. And I remember the briefing that occurred in the Oval Office, and Eisenhower heard Allen Dulles, the head of the CIA, and Foster Dulles, the Secretary of State, brief him and to recommend that we send in a Marine group in order to keep order. And when they gave their report, they indicated that they did not think there would be any intervention from the standpoint of the Russians, and that it would be a peaceful operation. And Eisenhower sat back, and after they'd given this report, he said, "Foster, let me ask you something. Let us assume our intelligence is wrong. Are you prepared to take the next step?" And Foster Dulles thought a long time. He said, "Well, Mr. President, I'm 90% sure that there will be no problem. But if there is, yes, we should be prepared to take the next step." The point of that anecdote is that Eisenhower would never have made the mistake of the Bay of Pigs. When the intelligence proved to be wrong, there wasn't the uprising that they had hoped at the time, and when it was necessary to have committed more air strength than had been planned, or at least not to cut back on what had been planned. In other words, in the hostage situation, rather than sending enough helicopters plus one, you should say send twice the number to be sure that if there were, as there turned out to be, mechanical or other difficulties, you'd be prepared to carry out the operation to a successful conclusion.
If you had still been in office, would you have taken the risk of the rescue mission?
Oh, yes. Oh, I think President Carter deserves high marks for taking that risk.